They paid $3,000 for a giant they could not control. By sunrise, 13 masters were dead, and an empire of cruelty had burned to ash. This is the night the swamp chose its warrior. April of 1859 arrived in the Louisiana bayou without mercy. The air was thick enough to choke men who had lived their entire lives breathing it. Water stood motionless beneath curtains of moss, hiding snakes, rot, and secrets older than memory. This was not land that forgave weakness. This was land that watched, waited, and swallowed. On the morning Josiah was sold, even the swamp seemed to hold its breath. They said he was 7 feet and 7 inches tall. Some claimed more. Others said the measurement changed, depending on who was telling the story and how afraid they were while telling it. What everyone agreed on was this: no man that size should have existed quietly. And yet Josiah did. He stood chained at the dock in New Orleans, wrists wrapped in iron thick enough for 2 men, ankles scarred from restraints that had already failed once before. His shoulders were broad enough to block the sun when he turned. His hands, each the size of a shovel, rested calmly at his sides. No right, no pleading, no fear. That unsettled them more than violence ever could. Beauregard Whitmore stepped forward through the crowd, boots polished, coat light despite the heat. Magnolia Plantation had made him rich. Sugar fields as far as the eye could see. Men who obeyed, women who broke. A system that worked because it crushed resistance before it learned to speak. When the auctioneer announced the price, $3,000. The murmurs rippled like disturbed water. That some could buy land, horses, influence. Whitmore raised his hand anyway. He didn't see a man. He saw a weapon. They called Josiah unbreakable. Previous masters had tried. Hunger, whips, isolation, dogs, prayer. None of it changed the way he stood, straight-backed, eyes steady, breath slow. He worked when ordered. He stopped when told. He spoke rarely, and when he did, his voice was deep and measured, like something that had learned patience over decades, not years. Whitmore believed patience could be beaten out of anyone. That belief would cost him everything. The journey to Magnolia Plantation began at dusk. Whitmore didn't trust daylight with something this valuable. He brought 13 men, hunters, overseers, dogs bred to tear flesh without hesitation. Rifles rested easy on shoulders. Confidence moved with them. Josiah was chained at the center of the procession. The swamp swallowed the path within an hour. Mud sucked at boots. Insects screamed. Fog rolled in low and thick, clinging to skin like a warning. The dogs began to whine, uneasy in a place that did not recognize their authority. One man laughed nervously. "Big bastard, don't look so tough out here." Josiah turned his head slightly. The laughter stopped. His eyes reflected the swamp's dark water. Not wild, not angry, aware. As if he had walked this land long before they ever dared to own it. By midnight, the swamp had closed completely around them. Paths vanished. Trees leaned inward. Sounds echoed where they shouldn't have. Whitmore barked orders, irritation creeping into his voice. They had brought maps. The swamp did not care. A rifle slipped into the water and vanished. One dog refused to move forward, tail between its legs, teeth bared at shadows no one else could see. Another snapped at nothing and had to be dragged along. Josiah walked without stumbling, without hesitation. Chains clinked softly, rhythm steady, like a clock counting down something none of them could see yet. Whitmore noticed. "You been here before?" he asked mockingly. Josiah did not answer, but the swamp did. A distant splash, then another. 2 controlled to be animals. Whitmore's men tightened their grips. They made camp on a strip of land barely solid enough to hold fire. That was when the first man screamed. Not loud, not long, just enough to let the swamp know blood had been spilled. By the time rifles were raised and torches swung wildly, there was nothing left to find. No body, no struggle, only disturbed water and silence that pressed in from every direction. Whitmore turned slowly toward Josiah. The giant stood exactly where they had left him, chains intact, hands calm, face unreadable. "You move," Whitmore said quietly, pistol drawn. "I'll put a hole in your head big enough to see daylight through." Josiah met his gaze. For the first time since the auction, he spoke. "This land don't belong to you." The swamp answered with a low, rolling sound, whined through cypress or something breathing. Whitmore laughed too loudly. And somewhere deep in the bayou, patience finally began to end. The swamp did not return the body. By morning, the men convinced themselves the scream had been an animal, a trick of fog and fear. Men like Whitmore survived by refusing to believe in anything they could not own. He ordered the camp broken, rifles loaded, dogs unleashed. The dogs would not move. They pulled against their leashes, whining low, eyes fixed on the tree line as if something massive stood just beyond sight. One snapped at the handler's arm and drew blood before being kicked back into place. Josiah watched. Not the dogs, the men. He studied the way fear rearranged them, how shoulders tightened, how voices sharpened, how eyes stopped meeting one another's gaze. He had learned long ago that fear made men careless, and carelessness killed faster than anger. They pushed forward anyway. The swamp thickened, paths narrowing until the procession stretched thin. Rifles bumped against branches. Torches hissed as moisture ate their flames. Whitmore rode near the center, jaw tight, pride bleeding out with every wrong turn. That was when the traps began. A man vanished up to his waist in mud that looked solid a step earlier. Another slipped, firing wildly, the shot echoing and then dying as if swallowed. Somewhere ahead, a dog's bark cut short in a wet, final sound that silenced the others. Whitmore shouted for order. Order did not answer. By midday, they were being watched. Every man felt it. The sense of eyes in places where nothing should be. Ripples in water that moved against the current. Birds that stopped calling all at once. The swamp was not hostile. It was attentive. Josiah walked as if guided. At one crossing, he slowed, chains tugging him back. Whitmore noticed the hesitation. "Move," he snapped. Josiah took another step, then stopped again. "This water," he said calmly, "ain't right." Whitmore struck him across the face with the pistol. "Everything about you ain't right," he said. "You walk when I say." Josiah stepped forward. The ground collapsed. Two men went down screaming, dragged under by suction and roots. Rifles disappeared. One reached for Josiah out of pure instinct, fingers slipping off iron and skin as the swamp claimed him. Josiah did not help. Neither did the swamp. They camped again at dusk, numbers reduced, confidence shredded. Whitmore counted heads and came up short. No one spoke about it. That night, Josiah was tied to a tree thick enough to anchor a house. Whitmore slept poorly, dreams filled with water and weight and eyes beneath the surface. He woke to shouting. A torch arced through the air and landed in the campfire. Flames leapt high and then spread where they shouldn't have. Oil-soaked ground ignited. Tents burned fast. Men ran. A rifle cracked. Then another. Not toward Josiah. Toward the darkness. A hunter charged into the trees and never came back. Another followed and returned moments later without his lower jaw, hands clawing at a wound that should not have been possible. The dogs broke free. They did not chase Josiah. They fled. Whitmore ran to Josiah, knife drawn, breath ragged. "You did this," he hissed, cutting at the chains. Josiah stood when the last link fell. For a moment, they were face to face, wealth and muscle, ownership and patience. Whitmore raised the knife. Josiah closed his hand around Whitmore's wrist. Bone cracked. Whitmore screamed. Josiah took the knife and drove it clean through Whitmore's thigh, pinning him to the tree. He leaned close, voice low enough to be swallowed by the swamp. "You paid for me," he said. "Now you're going to see what you bought." He turned and vanished into the dark. The rebellion did not announce itself. It erupted. From the trees came figures. Men and women Whitmore had never counted, never feared, never thought capable. Chains turned into weapons. Fire into signal. The swamp itself became an ally, guiding some and swallowing others. Rifles jammed. Powder soaked. Screams overlapped until they became noise without meaning. Josiah moved through it like something inevitable. A hunter fired point blank. The shot grazed muscle and spun the man around as Josiah struck. Another tried to run. The ground betrayed him. By the time the moon reached its highest point, 13 masters lay dead or dying. The Brotherhood of Magnolia Plantation was finished. Whitmore was found at dawn, alive, pinned to the same tree. Josiah stood before him, massive silhouette framed by smoke and mist. "This land remembers," Josiah said. "You never will." The swamp closed in as Josiah turned away, leaving Whitmore to a fate no chain could stop. By sunrise, Magnolia Plantation burned, and Josiah was already gone. Fire reached Magnolia Plantation before the screams did. Dry sugar fields burned like paper, flames racing the wind, devouring barns, quarters, records. Names turned to smoke before dawn could learn them. Iron rang against stone as chains were smashed open. Doors that had never been meant to open shattered in seconds. Josiah stood at the edge of it all, the glow of fire painting his skin bronze and red, his shadow stretching across the ground like something too large to be owned by night. He did not shout. He raised one hand. That was enough. Men and women moved, quiet, precise, long waiting. This was not chaos. This was release. Tools became weapons. Fear became momentum. The plantation that had fed on obedience collapsed under its absence. Those who tried to fight were swallowed by smoke and confusion. Those who tried to flee found paths turned wrong, gates locked, horses loose and screaming. The bayou received what the fire did not. Josiah walked through ash without haste. A rifle fired from a balcony. The shot cracked the air and mist. Josiah looked up, stepped forward, and tore the railing free with one pull. The man behind it fell into the fire and vanished without a sound. Iron screamed as it bent. By midnight, Magnolia Plantation was a skeleton of flame. By dawn, it was a rumor. Beauregard Whitmore did not see the sunrise. The swamp took him before light could. Some said roots pulled him down. Others swore they heard dogs howling and then silence. No body was ever recovered. Only his pistol, half buried in mud, rust already blooming like a judgment. Josiah did not look back. He led them north, away from roads, away from names, away from any place that believed it could measure a man by price. They traveled by water and shadow, guided by stars and memory. The bayou parted for them, as if recognizing something old and unfinished. At the edge of free land, Josiah stopped. He did not cross. "You're free now," someone said. Josiah nodded. Freedom, to him, was not a line on a map. It was the absence of chains in the mind. He turned back toward the trees. "Where you going?" another asked. Josiah smiled, small, quiet. "Home," he said. "Somebody got to remember this place." Years passed. St. Mary Parish changed its maps. Plantations fell. New men took old land and pretended history had not left fingerprints in the soil. But fires still burned strange in that region. Crops failed without reason. Dogs refused to hunt near certain waters. And sometimes, on nights when fog pressed low and the air grew heavy, people claimed to see a figure standing where Magnolia once ruled. Too tall, too still. They said rifles jammed when aimed his way. Said chains rusted faster in his presence. Said men who laughed at old stories stopped laughing when the swamp went quiet. No one ever found him, but no one ever tried to rebuild Magnolia either. The records called it a slave revolt, an accident, a storm. They listed 13 dead masters and closed the books. They did not write the truth. They did not write that a giant was bought to be broken and instead broke an empire. They did not write that patience can outlast cruelty, that some men are born too large for cages made by fear. But the bayou remembers. It remembers iron screaming. It remembers fire choosing sides. It remembers a man who walked out of ownership and into legend. And somewhere between ash and water, Josiah still stands. Not owned, not hunted, not forgotten,